Nurnberg Initiative. As I get older, I work hard because I wish in some way I could reach back in time across a parallel universe and help my younger self, whom I know is struggling immensely. My younger self looks into the future and puts me through hell and uncomfortable situations because all he wants is to be a hero one day, and he knows that's what it takes. At 15 years old, I got in my father's old white manual Chevy Cobalt and drove away from my home in Atlanta, Georgia. With no license and only a basic understanding of how to drive a stick-shift car, I was running away from home for good. I knew exactly where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do. I was on my way to Los Angeles, California to be an actor. That was about a year after the release of Iron Man in 2008. I had seen the movie, and like most kids, I thoroughly enjoyed the film, although my fascination hadn't fully taken effect yet. Little did I know that would hit me many years later as things would come full circle. My father, Robert Nurnberg, an aerospace engineer for Lockheed Martin, he worked on the F-Series fighter jets. My grandfather, Gene Nurnberg, was a NASA engineer in the early Apollo days, all the way through the beginning of the 21st century. American legends whose accomplishments seemed like a summoning Mount Everest or ocean floor diving, all the information on their computer screens like code from the Matrix. As I'm on the highway crossing over Georgia state lines into Alabama, my phone ringing nonstop, my parents frantically trying to reach me, probably terrified. I started to feel the darkness of the unknown that lay ahead of me. I decided to answer my father's phone call, and he told me he understood I was upset and to please come home. I say no and hang up. Somewhere in Mississippi, the gravity of the situation consumes me, and I see a text from my father saying to call him or he would be forced to call the police. So I talk to him and I say something has to change. I'm angry, I'm drowning. All I wanted to do was party with my friends, but he wouldn't let me. The idea at the time that my father was trying to protect me and just wanted me to make the right choices was lost on me. I was permanently grounded after having thrown a party at my house when my parents were out of town. That night was the last time I was part of the group, the last time I experienced not feeling mysterious or detached. From that moment on, I was permanently an outsider, a lone wolf, a serious, introspective teenager, lost in the void with a 100-yard stare, people would say. When I got back home from my round trip, having narrowly avoided a police search mission for a 15-year-old driving on interstate highways, I went to live with my grandma in Florida. I was a high school sophomore, not even old enough to drive, but at least I didn't have to listen to my friends tell me about this party or that and have an aching feeling in my heart wanting to be there. The same high school my dad went to in Merritt Island, Florida, near the space station where my grandpa's legend was made. I had one of my favorite films in my head when I walked into that new school for the first time. Never Back Down with Sean Ferris was also released the same year as Iron Man. I put myself in his shoes. I walk into the lunchroom and look around at all the happy faces. I imagine they wonder who the new kid is, and I head to the football field bleachers and look out onto the field. The same field where my father had been a captain as a sophomore linebacker so many years ago. I walked the halls not knowing a soul. I sat in classes and thought about my friends back home and the fun they were having on the weekend. I thought about the same girl with black hair and a contagious laugh. I thought about my brothers and all the questions they might be getting about me. My brother Brad is almost exactly a year younger than me and in the same grade as me. He inherited the engineering genius from my father and grandpa, smart and athletic. He was one of the best hockey players in the state of Georgia, loyal and strong. My brother Nick, 3 years younger than me, quiet and caring. The type of guy you would meet and feel a profound urge to give everything in the world to because you knew he would never take it for granted. He loved animals and hated violence. I believe he had some pain inside of him buried deep, same as me. Nothing in this world can compare to the love I have for my little brother Nicholas. My father used to tell me I was a great kid. I never cried and was always smiling. People would say your son needs to be on a billboard or TV commercial. I think that's true for a lot of people who struggle. The universe enjoys opposites. They are born angels destined to fight internal battles against our Creator's demons. From the time I can remember, I just wanted to be cool. I wanted people to respect me and I wanted to have fun. The universe gave me the opposite, like it was entrusting me with its most complex problem. all the hopes and dreams of a confident, ambitious man, coupled with a disconnect from social humans. Only later would I come to believe that it was a connection to something greater. My deepest fear was being surrounded by people and no one talking because of me, thinking that it was my fault. Most of the time I would get so overwhelmed by the silence and anxiety I would go into the bathroom only to start to hear people talking and laughing, and my heart would sink. It was in those moments I experienced the most pain, worse than being completely alone for months, broken bones, surgeries, going to jail, or fighting with Brad as kids, sometimes to the death before our father would show up to stop it. It was in those moments of sheer sorrow, listening to the laughs in the other room, looking at myself in the mirror, and wondering who I really was. It was there at a young age my addictions developed. I would come out of the bathroom, grab the closest beer, and drink nonstop until the silence went away, and before long my brain would be numb. I never considered myself smart. It wasn't until a hero of mine 10 years later told me I was brilliant that intelligence was ever an attribute I thought I possessed. I always considered my thoughts to be jumbled, my questions in my head meaningless, my lack of analytical skills, and the ability to weigh possible outcomes. I used to stare at my father's computer screen with all the equations and complex designs. I used to think, what alternative dimension did his brain live in? My only tool to cope was vanity. However, being average height and having odd facial features and being very skinny was never a true strength. I was perpetually stuck as an average man with minimal intelligence, crippling anxiety, and addictions who came from a bloodline of American heroes. A fleeting shadow of my grandfather's greatness, loved and respected by his peers. An abundance of charisma and joy, seemingly lacking even a fraction of the lost soul that resided in me. I used to watch the sunset alone hundreds of miles from my old high school and friends I grew up with. I think part of me enjoyed the theatrical feel to it all. I was obsessed with cinematic portrayals of the hero sitting atop the city alone, the pain that is buried deep inside of them, fueling his or her belief that they could change things for the better. One man chosen to change the world. It was all I had in those moments. Putting the world's problems inside of me, a bottomless pit of the universe's sorrows, headache, heartache, and struggle. I would sit for hours as the darkness would ascend over the water. As a 15-year-old kid, my 100-yard stare started to become miles. When I turned 16, my dad brought me the white Chevy Cobalt, the same car I took from him not so long ago. I was already very familiar with the stick shift. I would put it in neutral and coast down the hills every chance I got. I would turn up Wiz Khalifa in the car and go for long rides to and from school, recreating my own personal happiness in the separation from the real world that he portrayed I was drawn to. I joined the lacrosse team in the spring. We lost every game. I set a personal goal to score at least once a game, which I mostly achieved, still providing worthless to the 7-1 or 8-1 deficits that we would normally experience. My grandma Betty V was an angel, the greatest person on the planet to me. A successful business owner with endless amounts of friends in the Florida community. My dad would often come watch games with her, and I would do my best to hit someone as hard as possible to prove it was similar to football. 8 hours there on a Friday, 8 hours back on a Sunday. My father and I were completely opposite human beings. He had all the knowledge and work until exhaustion spirit that I lacked, and I was a vortex of human emotions, hopes, dreams, pain, and loss. I think we both would do anything to have what the other did not. I believe that's part of the universe's intricate architecture, a symphony of human and natural characteristics that make up everything. Give one what the other has not, and altogether the world is beautiful. No one thing is better than the other. I remember those goodbyes with my father, a handshake and a brief glance into each other's eyes, a recognition of the pain we both felt before we turned to walk away. Tears fall from my face and my chest tightens. I'm sure he experienced much of the same. Neither of us ever looked back at the other. In the summer of my sophomore year, my grades had improved slightly, and my addictions were not so heavy. I was the leader of a travel lacrosse team. The parties and fun I had longed to turned into afternoons on the porch with my grandma's dog and visits to the Space Center to marvel at the unimaginable task of sending our astronauts to space. Still, I longed to be with my old friends and miss my brothers. Part of me was so attached to getting back home to play beer pong in basements or to be a popular kid in school, but subconsciously that part of me was gone. What took its place was a spiritual separation from normal teenage life, a profound connection to everything. Happiness was an abstract idea that for me was feeling the emotion inside of me. I was the kid at the very top of the bleachers while everyone else cheered together at the bottom, forever disconnected. I had come to like it that way. Before the fall term of high school, my junior year, my dad offered to let me come back home. I took the opportunity to think I could become the version of my old self again. I walked into the main hall of my old school in August, shaking hands with my friends. They accepted me with open arms, and I'll always remember one of them before I left offered to let me stay with them. It had meant a great deal. It was a reunion of familiar faces in that high school, most keeping their distance, but a look of acceptance in their eyes. I fell into the normal way of high school life, training for lacrosse in the afternoon and laughing with old peers. The anxiety had started to get better and the silence was not so frequent. I got to see her black hair and long hill legs. I was never a good enough person back then to find out what could have been. Half my brain trying to be a normal high school kid, the other half was filled with my own overpowering emotion of a kid disconnected from everybody else. A hero was all I ever thought about. It was like my real self is back on the dock alone in Florida or consumed with the idea of fighting the rich popular kid like he never back down. That movie was my best friend. Marijuana had started to become a way of amplifying the pleasurable pain I felt inside. This deeply hurt my father. I broke his golden rule. Don't destroy your mind, the most sacred belonging to the Nurnberg bloodline. No amount of money or human connection can be traded for what they love the most. Protected by your skull atop your head, relatively safe from all things but one, addictions, my Achilles heel. In the beginning, I experienced great joy being back in Georgia, driving people to school in my car or going to parties with friends old and new. I still had many self-reflection moments of sorrow when things would go quiet and I would walk away to be alone in a bathroom or garage, but for the most part I enjoyed the company. School, however, was becoming more difficult. An F on a test or a 0 on a homework assignment would pop up online and infuriate my father. One fateful day, a couple of weeks before Christmas break, they took the keys to my car and the one thing that had been there with me no matter where or what I had. I felt the tsunami of regret for all the choices I had made for what I had become. The man leaning on top of a fence 15 yards away, watching everyone talk to each other, lost in my head. I was back in that place I had never really left. All I wanted to do was be 15 and in LA, living out in my car with no license, looking down on the valley and sharing my pain with other actors like Robert Downey Jr., who at times, I'm sure, had the same maverick feeling that consumed me. I had no car, no phone, and no money at the time in high school when on paper I should have it all. My dad would tell me not to leave and I would stay out all night. In classes, I would sleep through lectures and assignments, mostly just staring out the window, thinking about what it'd be like to walk around Jerusalem or Berlin, to look up at the Jesus statue in Rio de Janeiro. What God's Son must have felt inside of him, how much the universe had entrusted in him. My father worked 9 hours a day on an impossible task just to come home and watch me skip my homework, to listen to Iron Man videos on repeat or watch The Dark Knight for the 34th time. I was completely gone, never coming back. To think about the amount of pain that must have caused him is unbearable. By the spring semester, my grades were so bad I couldn't play lacrosse. One terrible thing I started to notice was the pain in my youngest brother's eyes. I started to wonder how much of the silence he had experienced, if rejection from his peers was a factor. It was soul-crushing. Eventually, one night, we trashed my friend's parents' house while they were out of town, and that was the end of the road for me in Atlanta, Georgia. My father made the decision that me and him would move up to Greenville, South Carolina during my senior year and do our best to graduate me from high school. He left behind a house he loved and his family to save my future. He missed my brother's high school hockey games. He passed up time to go fishing with Nick when Nick needed him most. It was as if he refused to let me go, no matter how much pain and isolation I welcomed into my world. The summer he rented a room in an old house. He slept on a small bed in the corner, and I slept on a mattress on the floor in the same room. He had a house with 6 bedrooms and a family back in Georgia, but he chose to share a tiny bedroom with me so I didn't have to tell my future father-in-law that I had dropped out of high school. I started to feel a small sliver of hope when I got my car back and started summer school. I had also decided to start playing football at this new school. I would train in the morning, study, go to dinner with my dad, and then sleep. About midway through summer, we got a nice apartment with our own rooms. He could cook dinner, and I was finishing much-needed Spanish and chemistry credits. I knew not a soul in the state of South Carolina. And that first day of school, my senior year, I knew exactly how it was going to play out. I'd walk into the cafeteria, take a look around, and head out to find a view of the football field to eat alone. Unfortunately, a couple of weeks before football season, I dislocated my shoulder in a fight, and a couple of days before the school year at practice, it popped out of place again. I left the field in pain, put my gear away, and never played football again. My brother started to play back home at our old school, so one of us was living out my father's dream. After a couple of days, some nice kids noticed me and asked me to sit at their table, so I did. A couple of days after that, I went to a basketball game and sat at the top of the bleachers while all the students were at the bottom. A pretty girl asked me to come sit with them, so I did and introduced myself. Part of me just wanted to stay at the top and have them wonder who I was. My dad and I started to talk about buying a house, so we looked around and settled on a nice place. It started to occur to me that he was going back to Georgia to be with my family. It would mostly be just me in the house. I decided I was going to have parties, but I promised myself I would make sure I graduated high school at all costs. My father had sacrificed too much. My brother Nick was growing upset back in Georgia, so he came to live in the new house with me, but went to a separate high school from mine because the new house was in a separate district from what I had already enrolled in with the apartment. Things were going okay. I had new friends and I was finishing classes. I also went back to Georgia a few times to watch Brad play and be with my old friends. My father was driving 4 hours there and 4 hours back every Friday, every Sunday. The amount of weight he carried on his shoulders was 3 lifetimes worth. I had a couple of mild parties with nice people, and I enjoyed my favorite pastime that always eluded me for the most part, beer pong. I smoked weed only occasionally. By wintertime, whenever I had people over, people from other schools started to show up, a lot of random people, many becoming drunk and fighting. It started to get over my head, and most of the time I just sat on my back deck and looked at the stars. Luckily, I still haven't gotten any legal trouble all this time, but I knew it was coming. Still, I was enjoying my freedom and being social so much I abused the trust my father put in me. In the springtime, I started to play lacrosse again. The team was beginners, so like usually I strived for a goal a game. I could have treated Nick better, my youngest brother, the innocent spirit and the Nurnberg fierceness. I'm not sure how he felt with a house full of people. Oftentimes, he went back to Georgia with my father or would just stay in his room. At any rate, it was working. I was close to graduation, and one night our lacrosse team even almost won a game. I developed some friendships with a lot of people in Greenville, and I enjoyed the city. I couldn't help but think that perhaps I was a negative influence on my peers, that I had invaded their way of life. I will forever be grateful to them for accepting me and helping me get to the finish line of a tumultuous high school career, which at this point had felt like a decade. Sometime in spring, the previous elusive thought of college started to slowly enter my thoughts. I went to take the ACT and did slightly above average. When I showed my dad and told him I wanted to go to college for the first time since I was 13 years old, I could see a glimmer of pride and hope in his eyes. Most major universities in America were out of the question. A very small part of me hoped I could play lacrosse somewhere, but that never happened. Then I started talking to 3 friends from Georgia who were planning on going to the University of Mississippi, Ole Miss. After some brief research, I knew this was where I wanted to be. I was going to study business. I always wished more than anything I could be an aerospace engineer, but I knew it wasn't possible. I always wanted to start an aerospace engineering firm with my father, my grandpa, and Brad. My close second dream only slightly behind, sitting on a cliff alone overlooking the Pacific Ocean, watching a new movie I was in on my cell phone. Me and my 4 friends set out on a road trip to Oxford, Mississippi to visit the campus. I drove somewhere in the dark roads of Mississippi. A giant muskrat or some sort of rodent came out of nowhere as we were going 65 miles per hour. I like to think we didn't kill it, but we did feel a loud bump on the tire. We could not help but look at each other, mostly wondering what the enormous creature was, and we burst out laughing, the most I'd ever laughed in my life. The vast fields in the middle of campus and the big buildings with columns were picturesque, like the universe assembled this exact place as a postcard for higher learning. I applied first thing when I got back home. I had to send in 3 different transcripts from all 3 high schools. About 2 months after the end of the school year, it was officially solidified I would be a high school graduate. Out of 225-ish kids, I was around 211. One afternoon after I got home from a lacrosse game, I received a letter with a red envelope entitled University of Mississippi. My chest was beating hard, knowing this was my only chance to go to college and for once make my dad proud. 2 things followed, a rush of joy like I had never experienced, then shortly after a tidal wave of disbelief. As I opened the letter in the first 2 sentences, I remember seeing the word congratulations and I let out a yell. I quickly went over to my dad and told him I got in, and he said that was great. He was excited and I wanted to call my grandma and my friends. Then right before I picked up the phone, I glanced back at the letter and started reading, Mr. Nurnberg, we would like to offer you conditional admittance starting in the spring semester of 2013. In other words, I was not accepted as a regular student, and I wouldn't start classes or live in the dorms until the spring semester. I was more than devastated. I was embarrassed, and a lot of the determination and hope I had started to reacquire began to fade again. I had no choice. I'd be a student at Ole Miss all the same in time. To anyone that asked at Wade Hampton and Greenville, I said I was attending the University of Mississippi, which was true. I relayed the confusing information to my Georgia friends. They wanted me to be a part of the group. I bet almost as much as I did, but I would again be an outsider. I never thought how hard my situation was for them, the embarrassment or awkwardness they had to endure. For that I am very sorry. We set up a way for me to live with them in the dorm in the spring. Prom was around the corner in Greenville. The administration through the year, I'm sure, had caught wind of the gatherings at my house that had gone on. One day at a basketball game, the principal pulled me into his office and told me he was unhappy with me and that I was a bad person. All I had done was try to make friends and spend the last months of my teenage youth surrounded by people instead of alone like I was accustomed to. Being alone is like a virus. Experience it for too long and you become immune. It becomes part of you almost as naturally as breathing, and in most cases you begin to prefer it. We took some prom pictures in a nice area in downtown Greenville. We arrived at the venue and headed for the entrance. 2 or 3 friends went ahead. My date went in, and I walked up to the principal, the same man who had pulled me aside about 2 months earlier. He looked at my ticket and told me that it was the wrong ticket. I look at the small yellow piece of paper, a raffle ticket, and say, "What are you talking about?" That was hardly any writing on it, and that's what they gave me at school. What could possibly be the right ticket? He tells me to sit on the curb for 30 minutes, and he will let me in. My date goes into the dance, and I walk to the curb 2 feet away, take my jacket off, a ridiculous red bow tie around my neck, and sit down. A teenager in a new city, my 3rd high school in 4 years, only conditionally accepted to one of the easiest colleges to get into in the South. My classmates walk by me with smiling faces, most just breezed by. A lot glance at me, and a few ask me what I'm doing. "I'm not sure, y'all go have fun," I reply. I look off into the distance, all the way to the Pacific Ocean. My gaze takes me. I start to think again about the city of LA, the rows of lights that run through the city at night, the hills and mountains to one side and the beach on the other with tall palm trees running down Sunset Boulevard. The place where I was born, my dad getting his master's at USC. I think about what would have happened if I had made it to the West Coast when I was 15. Would I have found friends? Would I have grown up with less heartache? Would I have found purpose? I longed to be on the Huntington Beach Pier with lost people all around me. I sat on that curb and thought about movies like Good Will Hunting, Gladiator, and 8 Mile, stories of heroes who were at times outcasted but remained unwaveringly remarkable. I got inside prom in time for a couple of pictures, and that was it. In about 20 minutes, we were all gone. School friendships, fun, and youth becoming a distant memory. A few weeks later, I walked across the stage and received a diploma. It shouldn't have said my name on it. It should have said Robert Nurnberg. It was for him. I fought for it for the sole purpose of walking up to him and handing it to him, thanking him for the hundreds of hours driving through Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina through the years. A nearly impossible task of keeping everyone happy, continuing important work, and saving his oldest son. As I left the graduation ceremony, I said goodbye to some new friends and headed back to Georgia to prepare that summer to head to Oxford, Mississippi with 3 old friends. It was decided that I would attend a couple of classes at the community college there in the fall and get an apartment for 6 months before becoming a student in the spring. My friends went to orientation while I met my 3 random roommates at an apartment complex on move-in day. It hurt fiercely not to be there with them, not have an Ole Miss ID and meet other incoming freshmen. Forever an outsider, a crusader of pain, my inner spirit forged by the flame of disconnect. I was instead in a small old building a couple miles away. I spent many days and nights with my friends in the Ole Miss dorms, walking around campus at my apartment, out at bars, or going to football games. They accepted me as an equal and we enjoyed ourselves. I felt happy most of the time and the silence was fleeting. It was mostly comfortable. About 2 months in, we all started to hang out at a certain fraternity. They accepted us and it was decided that all 4 of us would join. They were like older brothers, showing us how things were done and the bond we would share. They explained the official process, so we went online and registered. I put in my temporary Ole Miss ID. About 2 days later, we had a meeting with all the other guys who were pledging. They separated us into groups based on our last name. Slowly, names were called to be given name tag directions and sent home. Last name starting with M, then N, then O. In an instant, they passed my last name. No name tag or directions. I was not called. And I knew I couldn't rush because I wasn't a student until the spring. All the kids left excited about the new journey they would be on. I remained standing there in an empty hallway alone with my racing thoughts and disappointment gazing down into the dark hallway. There were a couple of things I knew for certain at that moment. My friends would move on, the silence would return, and college would be a similar version of high school. My narrow gaze in that dimly lit hallway stretched across the entire globe. In the coming weeks and months that followed, it grew more awkward the few times I did hang out with my friends in the fraternity. The silence and anxiety had consumed me. The only times I didn't have that feeling when I was alone in my room or at the community college, so that eventually became my routine. Alone with my thoughts and all notion of being a college kid and having fun, a disappearing illusion. I always knew my pain was shaping me, developing me to become whoever I was meant to be. One of my favorite quotes is, "A leader isn't born, he's made by steel and by suffering." It was because of this I was able to accept my realities. Christmas came and went. New Year's I spent sitting on a bridge alone in downtown Greenville, wondering what all the 19-year-olds must be doing around the globe. How many of them had nothing? How many of them had everything? I wondered what my grandpa must have been doing at 19 on New Year's as a basketball star in Nebraska with the intelligence of double mind, looks, and height. I remind myself it's a story. I didn't yet believe in destiny, that the universe carefully plans all things, that religion, science, and engineering are all intertwined, that there's an explanation for everything, but at the same time, we will never fully understand it. It would be many years later, in a single moment, I would come to grips with this. It was my first day as an official Ole Miss student in the spring. The leaves were a different color than I remembered, and the grass was lush green. The students are happy to be back, and I was grateful to be one of them finally. I had done decent at the community college and started college with 4 classes completed in a 3.0. I moved into the dorm with my old high school friend. He would tell me stories of pledship and funny moments with his brothers. I was longed to be one of them. I'd convinced my father to get me a truck for Christmas, a decision I look back on and think about how much pain that must have caused him given his love for the environment. He would walk through fire into the end of the earth if it meant I belonged. I was acutely aware that it was nothing more than an overcompensation on my part. The early days of the spring were good. I enjoyed the new food in the pavilion and the class subject matter. I considered playing for the Ole Miss lacrosse or hockey team. Looking back, I very much wish I had. My addictions, however, were severe, and around my roommate and friends, when there was silence, the awkwardness consumed me. One night I got completely drunk and in a terrible fight with my roommate, which I don't remember. I woke up with a swollen black eye and lay in bed while they went to a big party. I don't blame him for that altercation. In fact, it was him all those years that made me the warrior. I thank you for that. It got tense as the weeks progressed. My grades began to slip, and I had no escape to sunsets near the space station or fence to lean on outside the school parking lot, empty bleachers in the football stadium, or back deck to watch the stars in an empty house. Most of the time I felt sorry for my friends. I was always tagging along on the outskirts of their lives, never fully involved but barely hanging on. I felt like an anchor dragging their ship. All I ever wanted to do was be free and be part of the group at the same time. A feeling that left me and has yet to return after I took off at age 15. I ended the spring semester of my first full year of college with a 2.42 GPA. That proved significant because I came to find out I needed a 2.5 GPA if I wanted to join a fraternity in the coming fall. So I enrolled at a community college in Greenville, South Carolina that summer to take one class to attempt to boost my GPA above a 2.5. I was officially at 3 different colleges, and fate has a sense of humor. I took Geography 101 and we colored countries with markers on one particular assignment. I figured at this point, what's the harm in doing a little middle school level work? Maybe it would feel younger. All the detachment had added decades to my life, it felt like. I ended the summer term with a cumulative 2.51 GPA. I found out just a week before registration to join a fraternity had closed, so I enrolled in the Rush program, and it was decided this time around my name would be called. I was doing some thinking about where to live a couple weeks before the fall semester came around, and my old roommate from the dorm called me and said he had looked at a 4-bedroom house. I had already talked to my friends and the older guys at their fraternity we met when we first got to Oxford many times about me joining when sophomore year came around. I was the first to arrive at our new rental house in August. I was hopeful and eager to be part of the group. My friend from high school arrived shortly after, and then 2 of his pledged class friends with whom I had already been familiar with. We went to football games, cooked steaks on our grill, and played Xbox. One particular Saturday night, Ole Miss played Bama, and we won. We stormed the field, and all the students tore down the goalposts. It was the most fun I had since I was 15. It was almost as if I was part of the group, an equally respected brother, with no awkwardness or anxiety. Almost. I met the 2014 Rush class and was divided into groups. I walked over to the same hallway I had been left standing alone a year earlier. This time my name was called. It was a glorious moment. I was now days away from full acceptance and a future of friendships and fun. I received the name tag and instructions for the next 3 days. I met hundreds of guys from many different organizations, and then the time came for me to go to the house and meet the people I had been hanging around with for over a year. I walked in and was greeted by my roommates, my other 2 high school friends, some other friends from Georgia, and the guys whom I met when I first got to Oxford. I'm sure some thought I would eventually leave or would never be able to rush, but there I was in this moment. I was shaking kids' hands with the name tag on my shirt, a sophomore at Ole Miss. I left with a smile, feeling like I had accomplished something. Soon I would be an equal member of the group. One of the last fraternities I went to before the final day was Pi Kappa Phi. They were brand new with no house and not yet registered in Ole Miss Greek life system. There were currently about 25 members, all of them leaders and outsiders, a striking resemblance to my situation. This incoming class was going to be the official founding fathers of their Ole Miss organization, the school's newest fraternity. I walked out not giving it much thought, but finding it interesting. My mind had already been made up for the last year. The next morning, I went to the student union to get my next instructions. There was only one note card, Pi Kappa Phi. I hadn't been invited back to my friend's organization, the place I had been hanging around for the last year. My first thought was, how could I blame them? I had made it seem like I was already a member without having to do any difficult things they had to do. I went to parties and made things awkward. I drank too much, and I probably seemed arrogant to the people there who didn't know me. At that moment in the student union, my mind again took me back to one place. The stars on Sunset Boulevard, the rocky ledges that overlooked the Pacific Ocean, and the big Hollywood sign you could see from the city streets. I wish I had tried to play lacrosse or hockey at Ole Miss. Surely that group of people would accept me as a brother. I wish I had stayed home in Greenville after high school with Nick and done my best to be a better older brother. I wish I had just left the country after high school and gone to Jerusalem or Tokyo. I wanted to attend college and study, get good grades, and make my father proud, but this was all too painful and lonely. I guess part of me knew this would happen when I read that second part of the Ole Miss letter a year and a half ago. I let my mind race for a couple of hours, went to a nearby lake alone, and sat accepting my reality. Tomorrow I will join something completely new. The next day I walked into Pi Kappa Phi and was welcomed by the members who were very excited to see me. The new class was about 30 of us, a mixture of men from all walks of life who would together build something from the ground up. We met and talked and learned about one another. I think subconsciously most were like me, searching for a place to belong, not afraid to do something new. I started to feel like maybe this was meant to happen. The need to be cool had all but faded. Any ego I once had was gone. Being the new kid in school so many times and always an outsider had effectively crushed it. I started to think my father would really like these guys. They were intelligent, many of them engineers. I started to grow apart from my roommates and spent most of my time with my new fraternity brothers. I was now inside a group of outsiders, an ironic continuance of the universe's plan for me. We want what we cannot have, and eventually we become grateful that we never got what we wanted. Our pledgeship consisted of study sessions twice a week, no hazing or meaningless chores. We gained the original members' respect by joining something new on the ground floor. They gained ours by starting it. The Alpha Lambda Pi Kappa Phi chapter was chartered at the University of Mississippi in the fall of 2014. I thought perhaps future members would see my picture and remember my name. We held meetings with Pi Kappa Phi leaders from around the country. We had a banquet of Founding Father certificates passed around. For the next 8 weeks, we connected and built and laughed and a feeling of belonging amongst the outsiders. Then I made a terrible mistake, one that would affect me for the next 6 years. I usually rode with my roommates and friends anywhere after bars or parties, but one weekend before Thanksgiving break, I drove myself home. I was about 2 miles from the house, and I started to order pizza on my phone. A cop pulled me over right outside my neighborhood. I blew over the limit and spent the rest of the night in jail. I was devastated. The first time I had ever been arrested. I knew I'd have to break the news to my dad, which was the worst part. I slept on the concrete floor in the Mississippi jail, my father building F-37 stealth mode jets to defend our country against terrorist attacks, and my grandfather designing rockets to take us to the moon and beyond to expand human consciousness, while I lay in an old jail cell with 2 other drunk people staring up at the wall at 3 a.m. After going to court, I spent the next couple of weeks taking an ADSAP class in Mississippi before going home for Christmas break. I did everything I was supposed to legally in Mississippi and got a license in Oxford before I left. the DUI essentially taken care of, and the mistake starting to seem not so bad. However, a couple of years later, I would find out that South Carolina didn't see it that way, and I would go through 2 years that would break most men, which it did for me. But God kept me alive. Christmas break was difficult. My dad was forgiving, but I could hear the hurt in his voice. Since I was 15 years old, he had been struggling with me, sharing my pain, and I bet in some cases even worse. The first thing we did was get rid of the big red truck and trade it in for a Chevy like my first car, except for this one was automatic. We had many long, hard conversations about how to proceed and what I should do. After New Year's, we decided that to save money and refocus, I would stay home this spring and go back to Ole Miss next fall. I would save on rent for the house I was in, tuition costs, and fraternity dues. I decided I was going to do everything humanly possible to improve myself before going back to school. I worked every waking hour, 2 jobs at CVS and Jimmy John's. I didn't drink the entire time I was back in Greenville. Then I started to think about some of my insecurities. I went from the top down. My hair had a very pronounced widow's peak and an uneven hairline. I had terrible eyesight and wore glasses and contacts some of the time. My upper lip was slightly swollen from all the fighting and extended far past my bottom lip. It looked as though I was never serious. My height and weight, little muscle, just skin and bones. Being the son of a guy who played college football and the grandson of a college basketball player, I was subconscious. So the first thing I did was come up with the idea to do laser hair removal at a clinic about 1.5 inches of my widow's peak, 5 sessions of a burning laser on my scalp over a 2-month period, each one more painful than the last. In the end, it gave me a natural-looking, even hairline straight across. For my eyes, I decided to do LASIK, laser-assisted, to increase my vision. The first time, they held my eyes open and used a laser to cut a flap in the cornea. It was uncomfortable but not painful. It improved my vision, but in about 1.5 months, my vision declined again. I had to go back a second time to fully fix my vision for good. They held my eyes open like before, but this time I had to fill my eyes with water and use the laser again. In the days that followed, I experienced immense pain and kept patches over my eyes. About day 5, the pain stopped. I removed the bandages and I could see clear as day. My upper lip I had cut and redefined. They stuck a large needle in it to numb it and proceeded to cut a small sliver out. It looked normal and healthy. It was almost like I looked in the mirror and took myself more seriously. I exercised as vigorously as possible to gain weight, and for 15 minutes every night I hung upside down on a system I designed to stretch my legs and torso. By the end of the summer, my hairline was even, my hair falling natural on my forehead. The laser part was gone and tanned like the rest of my head. I would never have to wear glasses again or keep contacts in overnight. My eyes I could see extremely well. My face looked tighter and sharper, stronger, and I was the same size as my dad, almost as strong. I paid for it all with the 2 jobs and still had about $2,000 left to spend money at school. It was as if the universe gave me those problems so I could identify and fix them. I do not know if any of this stuff would work on other humans or if it would be strange. To my future daughter, there's something you need to know. Men and women are created different. You and all other females are born perfect, without flaws. Always be yourself. Never let society tell you what you should look like or what to do. Men are born to suffer and fail, meant to find themselves in the darkness, to create themselves into who they are supposed to be. The most important thing you ever need to know is that no matter what society tells you, no matter what you see on the internet, you are perfect. Don't ever let a knife cut you or a laser touch you. I knew what it felt like before I had executed the upgrades and what it felt like after. It was as if the universe said to me, a strong man who has known power all his life can lose respect for that power, but a weak man knows the value of strength and compassion. It was like I had developed my own super soldier serum, and given my history of wanting to be a hero, that made me very happpi. Pi Kappa Phi had secured a house on campus over the summer, and I decided to live in one of the rooms with a friend when I got back to school in the fall. Nick made the drive with me and helped me move in. He was always interested in building things and being outdoors. He was far more intelligent than me, but never applied his engineering IQ to school. Perhaps he saw my struggles in school and decided it wasn't worth the trouble. I had no doubt set a bad example, causing pain and regret I'll always be making up for. My return to campus was exciting. My new friends, who I had been getting very close to before leaving in the spring, embraced me. We had filled the house for the most part, and our fraternity was covering the bills and saving for events. We were building something together when I started, and they kept building while I was gone. An older member who had been a brother at a junior's college in Georgia really opened his arms to me, and we had many fun times. I started to really enjoy my business level courses, and dreams of starting Nurnberg Industries seemed tangible. In late September, Ole Miss played Alabama again, this time in Tuscaloosa. One friend had an extra ticket to go into the game, so the two of us went. It was a shootout. Before halftime, we got kicked out, and I left the stadium and walked toward downtown. My phone was dead, so I wasn't sure where everybody was. I picked a random bar and walked in to see all my friends sitting together. Brothers from across the states, across walks of life. Some of us, they wouldn't let in the cool club, but we had each other. Ole Miss miraculously won for the second year in a row. That semester felt exactly like how I imagined college was initially supposed to be. Flag football games and tailgates, group study sessions, and family dinners. I learned a lot from many different perspectives from so many walks of life. I think it helped. At this point, my ego was non-existent. I didn't care how people perceived me or my organization. I was just happy to be an equal part of a group. I took a particular interest in recruiting the second Ole Miss Pi Kappa Phi class, informing kids of my experiences and the chance to leave a lasting legacy. For the first time, I was on the other side of the line, meeting hundreds of new kids rushing. I wondered if anyone had the sort of struggle I had experienced, but I imagined probably not. Going upstairs with my brothers in between groups, talking about how far we'd come, I suspected most kids didn't take us seriously. They had made up their minds already, like I had 2 years ago. A select few would understand what type of organization we were, one that prioritizes school and intelligence, one that only judges you on how you treat other people. Surely you're not going to get much attention from the opposite sex, and there will be boring weekends. At this point, I knew building something is all that matters. At the end of the meetings, we sat in groups with slideshow presentations with information and pictures of the kids who returned. I would imagine the moment my picture popped up last year at the first return day I wanted to join. Who had chimed in, what negative things were said, and who had defended me. Did I deserve it? Probably yes, I did, but still, all my life I can imagine those moments I left the room. Did relief wash over my peers? Did they feel more comfortable when I was gone? What things would they say when I was not around? I think everyone has the right to decide who they want to be around. I don't blame anyone for how they felt. If anything, I was grateful to everyone I've encountered in my life, especially the ones who didn't want me around but said nothing. My newfound confidence, my network of friends, and the environment I've created for myself have awarded me the ability to not experience those old feelings. It was replaced by enjoyment and relaxation, a band of brothers with bonds I started to believe would last a lifetime. Then something came over me like a virus, inflicting every healthy part of myself. I added the worst addiction of my life and discovered gambling. The Mississippi River casinos are a short 35 miles west of Oxford. I was about 2 months into being 21 years old. My first time sitting at a blackjack table was a rush of feeling like I had never experienced. Every hand I won, I felt like I had the intelligence I had always longed for. Everything good in my life would eventually start to fade away. The first time I walked out of that bright, flashy entrance of the casino at 6 a.m., up $200 with a euphoric feeling in my bones, I would remain addicted for most of my young adult life. Initially, it was groups of us, my friends and me, enjoying ourselves, but for me, it started to get more serious and riskier. Eventually, it went from 10 of us to 5, me and one other person, and finally it was just me, alone. I would drive the 35 miles on a Friday night to sit at the table all night with complete strangers. The rush of excitement and inevitable defeat consumed me every time. The worst part wasn't dragging my friends all the way to the musty casino to lose money they didn't have. It wasn't the isolation I started to experience that I had worked so hard not to experience again. It wasn't my grades suffering and all the headache of trying to finish assignments while feeling my addiction. The worst part, far beyond anything else, was the slow disappointment I was again causing my father. A man who calculates and analyzes every aspect of his life, while I risked our hard-earned money on an impossible game. I think part of the reason my gambling addiction was so extreme is because subconsciously my father was supporting me. He would give his last breath just to see me smile, to see me succeed and create a future. By the time my senior year came around, my transcript was filled with C's and D's. My friends were just friends on paper. In the house I stayed in, that one of my fraternity brothers owned, no one was ever around. The few events I did attend with my girlfriend who couldn't leave me because of the small flicker of potential that was once blazing me when we first met. At the height of my addiction, the epitome of the disease that was inside me, we were in New Orleans for a formal. After the event, I went to a Harris casino a mile from the hotel, lost my last $125, and walked home alone in the dead of night. For all the great things the universe had given me, then taken away, then allowed me to earn back, only to lose again, I pondered the purpose of it all. I always accepted the notion that pain made you stronger, teaches you things, but I had become angry again, and there was a darkness around me. How could I do this to myself? How could I do this to my family or my friends? I thought about Brad and Nick, how hard they worked, how proud they made my father when I could not. Sure, they had their own challenges and heartaches, but never would they take advantage of the generosity and blind faith I was given. My father slowly explained to me he couldn't support my gambling habits and that food and nutrition would be all he could supply me with. I needed to get a job. I began the job search in Oxford, Mississippi area. I had many food and beverage or retail jobs over the years, and I wanted something that having to do with business. I stumbled upon a posting for an advertising sales role. It was a small office run by a local lawyer and his sales manager for the business. The service was a high-tech picture frames in the restrooms of various locations. We would design ads based on the client's business and install them in the frames. I got to work calling local businesses. Hello, my name is Dion. I'm a sales representative. Click hang up. Hello, my name is Dean. I'm a sales representative for Indoor Advantage. Click hang up. For some reason, I enjoyed it. I like collecting business cards, sending cold open emails, and talking to business owners. The first meeting I set up with a local realtor, I went in nervous, but I realized I was meeting someone who didn't know of my previous insecurities or active addictions. I was a part of the community just like them. Shaking her hand, I just seemed like a confident local businessman who had grown up this way, energetic and likable. I also enjoyed communicating with people much older than me. I think they could sense my life experience exceeded that of my peers, whether for good or bad. I started closing a lot of deals, developing business relationships, and earning money. I also had the idea to merge our print advertising business with digital advertising. Many of my clients were pleased with the assistance I provided in navigating the digital world and putting the ads that we created on new platforms. However, my manager did not. He stated I acted without permission, even though he was never around. He told me that's not what our company does, even though we are an advertising firm. I can't blame him fully. He hired me and taught me many things. Perhaps the scale of my vision for what we should be offering went beyond his scope of control and made him nervous, which I could understand. One day I received a LinkedIn message from a Memphis Grizzlies basketball team employee offering company event packages. In my mind, a light went off. What an opportunity this could be for our frames in all the restrooms of the FedEx Arena. I initiated a conversation and that said we were a small company, not likely going to purchase any packages, but perhaps we could discuss a partnership. She put me in contact with the manager, which I started to email back and forth. After a week-long exchange and discussion on the benefits we could provide each other, he agreed to meet me. It felt grandiose and unlikely to happen to me, a sales job that most people would laugh at or look down on, possibly take me to a professional sports arena. The day I confirmed it could be a serious business deal, I went to the owner of Indoor Advantage. He didn't congratulate me or reprimand me. To be honest, I can't remember what he said. I do remember my sales boss telling me everything I did wrong, that it wasn't my job, that I didn't know what I was doing, and sticking to my job, calling 50 people a day so 45 people could hang up on me. That's not what I saw when I signed on. I saw the opportunity to design ads, to expand the scope of the business and create new avenues to help people market their products and services, to offer a fair service that's beneficial to others and create more revenue and exposure. The two of them, my manager and the owner, went to the Memphis Grizzlies meeting without me. I thought what a learning experience it could have been for me. Perhaps I would have been out of place unprofessionally, too young, but that's what humanity is about, showing our young men and women to reach for something that should be unattainable, to walk where the path is not yet paved for you. If the job of our older leaders is not to teach and include you when you earn something, then what is? Perhaps it was just business. When they returned, they explained that their business wasn't big enough to operate in Oxford and Memphis. They didn't have the infrastructure, and they emphasized they didn't have the capital. I suspected they had been rejected, maybe because I wasn't there. A month later, my boss left the country for I wasn't sure how long. I was to run everything by him via email, every meeting, every offer, every deal, every design. All the paperwork, it was a nightmare. It was 2 months before the start of the football season when he left our best-selling ad space in the frames in the large bathroom trailers on wheels on the Ole Miss campus in the Grove where everyone tailgated. Thousands of people would go in and out of those trailers a day, standing right in front of our frames, glancing at the ads. I began to set up my clients' orders, change ads when I needed, get new designs, maintain our online presence, and acquire new business. I stopped emailing my boss after the first week he left. A couple of weeks before the season, I signed a $13,000 deal with a real estate developer and received my biggest check yet, $2,000. When my boss finally returned, I suspect he went straight to the owner and said some negative things about me, complaining about all I had done without him. The owner called me 2 days later and explained his sorrow and regret to inform me that he had to let me go. Explaining to me he thought I was a marketing genius, but he had a contract with my boss and there was nothing he could do. I went over my boss's head. I did many things without his permission. I would have been mad too. He had every right to fire me. I did it to be proactive, to learn things about myself. I did it because it was actually fun and beneficial to the community businesses. After I started to acquire my first few clients, I had become addicted to the business. It hurt very much to let that business go. My schoolwork suffered. My GPA was getting close to the 2.0 needed to graduate, and the C minimum for my junior and senior level courses was difficult to obtain. One weekend I took $700 to the casino, about 3/4 of my money. I turned it into $2,000 cash. I held it in my hand when I got home. It was the spring of 2017. I was in 2 level 400 business marketing classes, already distracted at the start of the semester from work, and then distraught when I got fired. The next weekend, I took all the money I had to the casino, and about 5 hours later, it was all gone. I walked out at 6 a.m., bright lights flashing at the entrance of the grand, beautiful building, giving the illusion of joy and wonder, but really providing only misery. I sat in my car for 10 minutes alone. The job I loved was gone, and my fraternity brothers, for the most part, were not returning my calls. School seemed complicated and fortunately unimportant, and the money I had earned was gone. I never felt more hopeless in my life than in that moment. I have experienced loneliness, pain, awkwardness, and heartbreak, but never hopelessness. I always had the drive to do something great and to do good things, but at that moment there was nothing. I immediately started to drive back east. I decided I was going to go back where my father was living. I had the clothes on my back and my laptop was in my car. I went straight from the casino parking lot to my new home, Bluffton, South Carolina. I arrived at my parents' house and knocked on the door. My father answered. He looked into my eyes, dropped his head, and then gave me a hug. I knew he was furious and disappointed, but he had this ability to only display love as he had run through all the scenarios of yelling at me, calling me worthless, and shutting the door in my face. But I decided in a matter of seconds the best course of action, the decision that would in the long run yield the best results, was to show me love and forgiveness. My father was always tough on me and made me earn things. He was the architect of the strength I have now. I don't believe my failures were because he gave me everything I wanted and let me get away with anything, because he did not. He showed me the value of hard work, determination, and doing the right thing. I simply was just not strong enough. Everything I had gone through was my fault. I could not block out all the bad things, the addictions. No matter how hard I tried and how many successes I experienced, it was not enough for me to do the right thing 100% of the time. We went to the beach the day after I got home. I explained everything to him, my whole journey. Most of it he already knew. After giving me advice, telling me he was disappointed but understood, and begging me to please do the right thing, he made a comment sometimes he made after yelling at me when I would call him, saying I had no money. "What did you put it on, red or black?" Same as always, I said red. "Fuck," he replied, and went home. I spent the first few weeks and months in Bluffton with little ambition. Still battling a nagging gambling addiction, I picked up heavy drinking for a short while. I contemplated what sort of work I could take with no college degree in a small coastal town. I did jobs in food and beverage for a short amount of time, then took my second sales role. I was an RV and boat factory superstore. It was pretty much minimum wage. Their product's business model was flawed. However, I was happy to be back in business attire, meeting new customers. I also met a group of people who are similar to me, your basic sales crew, and we bonded immediately. Over the next 7 months, we talked about boats and RVs, hung out on company golf carts, and talked about life. I was making little money but was content and okay. The ambition that came and left within me over the years slowly started to return after leaving that casino. One day I was over at my coworker's house, and he had one of his high school friends over, a kid our age with black hair and a big smile. His name was Christian Copeland. Christian grew up in Hartsville, South Carolina. His parents left him when he was a child, and he grew up dirt poor with his grandma. By the time I met him, he was very successful in sales and marketing on Hilton Head Island. He had $35,000 in his checking account, which to me seemed impossible. We became best friends quickly. We were both college dropouts with trauma in our past, equal in confidence and stature. He was fascinated with my father and our intelligence. I was fascinated with his ability to make and save money and his charisma. We learned from each other. Although we both were heavily addicted to marijuana and alcohol, he helped me quit gambling. And I think me and my father gave him a certain peace he never got from his parents. It was fun and simple times. Often we would head out to the beach or hang out at the local watering hole. He would always tell me, "You're going to be the best one day." I switched jobs to a sales associate at Ford Motor Company, which I was happy about. It felt more legitimate, slightly better pay, and more enjoyable. I did well selling mostly F-150s. However, it was difficult for me to save money. Then one day, my past came back to haunt me. As I was driving home from work, I got pulled over. I wasn't drinking or smoking anything in the car, so I wasn't nervous. I gave the officer my Mississippi license. I had yet to renew my South Carolina one, and he went back to his car. 2 minutes later, he came back and asked me to step out. At this point, I get paranoid. I don't know what this is for, and I had spent the night in jail before. I never wanted to go back. He proceeded to tell me my license was suspended. I said, "How can that be? I have a valid Mississippi license right here." I was sure I had lifted the suspension when I took the classes back in Oxford when I got a DUI. He then told me that I had to take the ADSAP classes here since I had a South Carolina driver's license at the time of the arrest. I was shocked and confused, thinking that the past year I'd been here I had a suspended license. How was I able to get hired at both my jobs? He then told me that he could take me to jail and he would have to call his supervisor to see how to proceed. I was terrified. He came back a minute later and told me I could leave, but to get this taken care of immediately. Anxiety started to overwhelm me as I drove off. Any minute I could get pulled over and taken to jail. The charge would be driving without a license, even though I'm looking at a valid ID that the Mississippi DMV had given me. And I'd taken the necessary classes years ago. I went to the Bluffton courthouse the next day and got a meeting with the counselor. She began to explain to me the issues with my particular case, what had happened, and what I needed to do. She informed me about the ADSAP class I needed to complete to get the registration lifted and get a South Carolina license. The class was twice a week, 2 hours apiece at 11 a.m., 30 minutes away from where I lived for 3 months straight. I was dumbfounded and felt numb. How was I supposed to get off work and make the time to go to these classes? I would certainly have to quit the job I liked. How was I supposed to get to these classes if I wasn't supposed to be driving? A more obvious problem, but understanding stipulation, was I also would be tested weekly for alcohol and drugs. I now faced the most difficult time in my life, living every day afraid that I could be pulled over and spend the night in jail. I couldn't quit my job. I had bills to pay, and my dad had lost so much of his hard-earned money to my gambling. I was understandably on my own. The first thing I did was start drinking until I could feel no more anxiety. I was under immense pressure. I would tell myself every day I would schedule the class. I would stop my addiction. I would stop partying with Christian and chasing girls, but I was just a kid, 22 years old. I just wasn't strong enough. After about 5 months of my heart jumping whenever I'd see a cop and trying to drive only when I had to, I got pulled over again one afternoon. I immediately began to explain this situation to the cop. I told him about all my problems, how I had wound up like this, and I asked him to please not take me to jail. He acknowledged my troubles and said he had to call his lieutenant. After 2 minutes, he came back from his car with a ticket and a court date 4 months from now. He explained he was going to let me go, but I had to finish my ADSAP class and get my license for him to drop the charge. I was overwhelmed with despair and fear. How was I going to pay my bills and keep a job? I had to figure everything out to get my license back and still be social. It didn't just feel impossible, it felt stupid to even try. I drank myself into oblivion for the next 2 months. I woke up one day, sometime in the spring of my 23rd long, hard year on this earth. I have lived on both ends of the spectrum, being either super happy or utterly hopeless. I was $1,500 behind on my rent. My F-150 inventory at work was depleted, so sales were low, and my court date was rapidly approaching. So the first thing I decided was I needed a new job, and I needed to get out of the expensive apartment. Christian had been successful on the marketing team at a timeshare company on Hilton Head Island and suggested I go into sales. The company was willing to give me a free apartment to live in that they owned, so I took the job and subleased the apartment I was already leasing. So I got rid of that burden. When the day came to move, I packed up what little belongings I had, said goodbye to my Ford coworkers, headed to the island 20 minutes away. As I was leaving, I could feel a small sense of relief, but I knew my problems were far from fixed. Then about 5 miles from the bridge to Hilton Head, I saw flashing lights in my rear view. I wasn't wearing a seatbelt. The feeling wasn't fear or hopelessness, anger or sadness. It was beyond all those things. It was as if the world hadn't been invented yet for this exact pit in my stomach. The officer had already run my information before he got to window and knew who I was. I immediately asked him if he could please call his supervisor and see if he could schedule a court date and give me time to get my license. After a couple of minutes, he came back and gave me a ticket and scheduled a court date for the end of the summer. I left with my heart racing. So if I didn't clear the holds on my account at the DMV, complete the 3-month ADSAP class, and get a current South Carolina license, I was now facing 2 charges. I don't remember much that summer. I spent every waking hour selling timeshare for a shady company or drinking with Christian. We lived in the same neighborhood in the company housing. I would take a shower in the morning filled with regret for what I was selling and thinking I have to get out. I have to escape. I can't do this anymore. About a week later, I bought a bottle of vodka to the beach, sat alone for a while, made peace with God, and got into the water. I swam slowly past the waves, looked back at the people on shore, and thought about whether any one of them had ever felt this hopeless. Then I looked forward, accepting that this was the end. I got so far out that the people were just like a blur. My whole body was tired, and I started to drown. Then in a split second, instinct kicked in, and I couldn't let myself go. So I used every bit of strength I had and swam towards shore. It seemed like an impossible task that I would be able to make it all the way back, but the waves carried me, and I was able to hobble back to shore. One person, a girl sitting on her towel, sunglasses still on, asked if I was okay. I didn't acknowledge the half-hearted question. I just laid down in my spot in the sand and passed out. I had cheated death for the first time. When I got home, I went back to the drawing board like I had in college before the upgrades. I ordered some boosters for my New Balance shoes. The first week, they were too bulky, so I took a sander and shaved them down. The second week, my feet were covered in blisters, so I took the insoles out, put the modified boosters at the bottom of the shoe, and the insoles on top. Eventually, the blisters went away and the pain was manageable. After everything, the Iron Man suit and I had become one. With newfound optimism and confidence, one night out, I met an older guy who worked for a Marriott Vacation Club on Hilton Head, selling timeshares exactly like what I was doing. My mind began to piece together the idea of becoming a sales executive for one of America's most valued and respected companies, representing a product that holds enormous value and becoming financially independent. I got a text a couple of days later inviting me to an open hiring event to meet the managers to see if they wanted to extend an interview. I felt comfortable and confident, and I felt like this was what I was meant to do when I was in that sales gallery for the first time. I left with a sense of pride and purpose for what I wanted the future to look like. The recruiter set up a date for a phone interview in 2 weeks. I just had to stick with my current timeshare job for a little while longer to keep my house. I was certain that Marriott was going to be my next job. One morning I woke up at 10 a.m. hungover. My phone was ringing. It was Marriott for the interview. I had completely forgotten it was scheduled for this time. I answered as professionally as I could, sitting upright in my bed with no shirt on. The interview went on for about 20 minutes of basic conversation about my experience and what I would do in certain situations. Then he asked me a question. He said, "You're 23 years old. Why should Marriott hire you?" I thought about saying something like, "I'm energetic. I'll be focused. I'm good with technology." Instead, I just said that I would be able to truly appreciate how much this would change my life being so young. I started the phone call slightly doubtful, feeling as if nothing might ever change, but at the very end, after I hung up the phone, it felt like my life was about to start, and for the first time I could be successful. The following days felt like weeks, and the weeks felt like months. One night late in the summer, I was out with Christian and I got into a fight. He was much bigger, and after a couple of swings we wrestled on the ground for a minute until I couldn't get up. The lights had gone out in the bar area and everyone was leaving. Many people passed me lying hurt on the ground. I heard one girl say, "Doesn't he work for Marriott?" The cops finally came and said I could get a ride home with someone or they would take me to jail. A member of the band cleaning up a set overheard and offered me a ride. I got home around 1 a.m. with a swollen eye and shattered spirit. The next morning I woke up and decided I was going to change my life. I would do whatever it took to fix my problems and become a better person. I quit my job, left my company house, drove back across the bridge to Bluffton and knocked on my parents' door. My father looked at my black eye and knew it must have been a serious altercation. The next few days, I slowly eased my way into a positive routine, and my addictions went into hibernation. The first thing I did was hire a lawyer in Bluffton to figure out the issues with my license, organize my legal issues, and manage my court dates. The sense of fear and anxiety I had about going to jail felt a little bit more manageable. Then, after a week of being back home, I received a phone call from Marriott. I had gotten the job. It gave me the greatest shock of ambition I'd ever felt. It suddenly felt like every small positive thing I could do had a purpose, like I was stuck in the middle of nowhere and a car made by Marriott had arrived. All I had to do was chart the course and stay on the right road. As all the paperwork is being sent to me for onboarding, I realized two things. I have to pass a drug test and I have to have a valid license. So I scheduled the test for the last possible date, 2 weeks from then, and I entered my Mississippi driver's license number, hoping that would suffice. I spent the following days training, sweating, drinking water, anxiously waiting for my background to clear. I passed the drug test and, to my surprise, had no issue with the background check. I was free and clear, ready to push my way toward becoming successful and finding ever-elusive peace and happiness. I was a Marriott Vacation Club sales executive. I walked into the sales gallery where there was pictures on the walls of cities in Paris, beaches in Greece and the Bahamas, large TV screens with information about Marriott, a long hallway with greeting booths filled with furniture and office space on the second level, with 25 individual meeting rooms equipped with high-tech computer screens and round tables. I was in the epicenter of the sales world, where vacation ownership had first begun in 1984 on Hilton Head Island for the most respected travel company in the world. We trained for 2 weeks there in Hilton Head. The head of the sales office, the 6 of us, and my boss. I was the youngest at 23 by more than 10 years. On the third and final week, we went down to Orlando, Florida to attend a company-wide group training. As I drove out of South Carolina into Georgia and Florida, I felt great joy. I thought perhaps I could legally drive in Florida. In a group of more than 40 new hire Marriott sales executives, I was still the youngest by a wide margin. We received statistical analyst training on the pricing structure of the vacation club versus the cost of traveling in the basic Marriott hotel system. We compared scripts and memorized our presentation, videotaped our sales pitches to one another, critiqued our performances, and studied the Marriott resorts and worldwide locations. I entered a 23-year-old college dropout with mounting legal problems and a fractured spirit. I exited a confident professional with an uncompromising optimism about the future. A couple of days into the training, I talked to my lawyer, and he had pushed my 2 court dates out a couple of months. When I returned home, I talked to my boss, and he agreed to give me Monday and Tuesday off, and I would work the weekend shift. I called my court counselor and scheduled the ADSAP class for Monday and Tuesday for the next 3 months. I had charted my course to freedom, and all the solutions to my problems were in motion. I sat down with my first client, a couple from somewhere up north, dressed in a silver suit, halfway confident, but mostly nervous. After 90 minutes, they kindly told me they weren't interested and left. Over the course of the next 2 weeks, this was the scenario for every meeting. I brainstormed ways to better portray Marriott products. I would come to the realization of why it was such a great product for people, and I tried to convey my confidence in the meetings. One day after work, I was talking with my dad, and we decided to build an Excel spreadsheet to better portray the financial benefit of being a Marriott owner. We built tools inside the presentation. You could plug in the price of the vacation club package, and then below you could plug in the price of a hotel. Our spreadsheet would show the savings over time in exact numbers. Generally, we were taught that spending a lot of time on logic or numbers was counterproductive, so I would incorporate my spreadsheet towards the end of my presentation, and it helped me quickly give a detailed description of the cost-benefit analysis. My first deal came days later from an African-American couple who was very kind to me, highly intelligent and hardworking. The very next day, I made my second deal, a single mother from Jamaica, also African-American, a highly accomplished accountant. In a matter of 2 days, the black community saved my life. I sat in my car, yelled at the top of my lungs, and thanked God. I thought about all the privileges I had been born with in life and how many failures I had experienced, mainly because of my selfishness and addictions. These three people from different walks of life has single-handedly given me financial breathing room and brought me some confidence that I was the right man for the job with my Marriott bosses. In the coming weeks and months, I worked diligently making deals, staying sober, and attending my ad type classes. A girl who I met and liked when I first got to Bluffton the first night we met, and I carried her up a flight of stairs as a joke. We didn't talk after that. I found out later she thought I was older than I was, but we bumped into each other a couple of times over 2 years. I asked her out on my 21st birthday, September 19th, 2018. That day in the office, I made $3,500 and got to kiss her that night. I carried her up the same set of stairs in Savannah, Georgia, where we met 2 years ago. We spent most of our days together after that. Her black hair and my dark blonde hair, I like to imagine we looked like my favorite cinematic couple, Brian and Mia. Everything was par on the course. My bank account grew from 0 to 5,000, then 10, then 15. I avoided all social gatherings involving drinking and smoking and spent most of my free time reading or in the gym. 2.5 months in, sometime in late November, I caught myself reflecting on how hard it had been to get here and started to believe I had really done it. My life had been fixed. I had a final meeting with my counselor who confirmed I completed the process and paid the final due. I was just waiting the necessary 5 days for that to clear, to go to the DMV to update my information and get a new license, the final step. As I left my house to go to work on the morning of November 27, 2018, I was 24 years old. On Tuesday, wearing a blue blazer and blue dress pants, I remember it was warm. The sun was shining. I got into my Nissan Altima and headed to the office. Traffic was bad, bumper to bumper. The light about 40 yards before the bridge turns green. I slowly move past the light, and for some reason, I'll never know why, I glance at my phone, and then I hear a crash. I had rear-ended the car in front of me. Nothing major, but it was a certified car accident. Physically, I wasn't injured, but my mind went blank, and my body felt numb. I knew instantly everything was about to be taken from me. For some reason, I didn't care. I couldn't care. I didn't have enough youth left in my body to care about how this would affect my future. Perhaps I lost that youth long ago, and maybe it just never returned. The cops showed up first, 1, then 3. I stood on the grass watching cars go by, heading off to their lives. Maybe they had never had any serious problems or things to worry about, carefree, and the feelings that afflicted me were as strange to them as foreign language would be to me. The police officer who arrived first on the scene started to ask questions. I remember he was respectful, not aggressive. I tell him everything with no hesitation. I tell him my whole story and mention that I've completed my ADSAP class. He listens, then walks away and looks as if he's thinking, then tells another officer to search my car. They put 2 things on the hood of my car, a crushed beer can they found in my trunk, and a tiny nug of marijuana from under my back seat. They told me to turn around, put me in handcuffs, and told me I was being arrested for DUI, open container, driving without a license, and possession. He read me my rights and put me in his patrol car. They first took me to a hospital where I took a drug test, then down to the police station. While there, I took a breathalyzer and blew 0.0. Then I was stripped naked in front of 2 officers and given an orange jumpsuit. After they put me in a holding cell, a large area with many beds, I was alone. It was about 9:30 a.m. I tried to lie down, still indifferent. I wasn't scared or angry or depressed. I was just all alone. I started to do what any good, fairly innocent man would do. I did push-ups until I couldn't feel my arms. At about 12 noon, they put someone else in the room. He just went straight to sleep and we didn't speak. Sometime in the early afternoon, they called me out and brought me into the second room. There they put chains around my legs, tied them to my hands, and walked me into a courtroom. I looked at the judge. He stares at me and reads the charges. I told him I was on my way to work. I blew 0 on the breathalyzer at the station, and I had completed the ADSAP class and was going to get my license this week. He then asked me what I do for work, and I tell him I'm a Marriott executive on Hilton Head. After a long pause, he told me my court date was 3 months from now and said I was free to go. I went into a separate room, was released from my chains, and given back my clothes. I changed into a suit and tie in the middle of the jail and walk out the front door. My dad is already sitting in his car, ready to pick me up. The first thing that was said was no yelling, no questions. He just asked, "Are you hungry?" I said, "Yes." "Can you take me to Firehouse?" He said, "Sure, son." The next day, I asked Christian to pick me up in the morning since my car was wrecked and my parents had to work. Dressed in a silver suit, he was 15 minutes late, and I had a company meeting every Thursday at 7:45 a.m. in the meeting room with every sales representative. We also ran into traffic. I arrived 7 minutes late and walked in the front door. 30 professional Marriott sales executives staring at me, almost 15 years older than I was. For some reason, there was one empty chair at the front of the group. I sat down. My manager immediately said, "No accident today," in front of the whole office. I said no, stayed silent, and after the 30-minute meeting, we walked to our offices, a shared space. A coworker approached me and asked if I needed a lawyer. The whole office had seen my mugshot. My manager had seen my mugshot. My girlfriend's mom, 2 states away, had seen my mugshot. Her friends had seen my mugshot, and people all over our town had seen my mugshot. It was as if everyone thought they knew I was a drunk who crashed his car and went to jail. Only my family and Christian were the ones who knew the whole truth. I walked out of the Marriott office 5 minutes later and never looked back. I had a job that I loved, a company I respected, and a boss who had given me a shot, and it changed my life. However, I was now an outsider at Marriott, and I couldn't bring myself to stay. I called Christian, and he picked me up. We went to the beach and drank until we couldn't stand anymore. I was pissed and hurt, mostly tired of all the complications, the confusion, the fear, and the anxiety. However, I was not hopeless. I knew I had done the work. I had a lot of money and had completed the ADSAP class, so that was official. My lawyer consolidated my now 6 charges into one court date 3 months from then. Christian and I decided to get a house together on the beach. All I wanted to do was go to this court date and figure out when or how I could get my license back. My manager called me 3 days later and offered me my job if I still wanted it, but I couldn't go back. I had no motivation. I just wanted the days to go by, so I sent in my official resignation. In the coming months, I would describe it as a haze. I enjoyed my free time and my financial success. I couldn't see into the future past my court date coming up. My girlfriend stuck by my side but couldn't tell anyone, her friends or her family, so we rarely saw each other. Me and Christian spent our days drinking beer, speculating on the stock market, and gambling all on football and basketball. All previous addictions had returned. I wasn't particularly proud of those 3 months, but I had affirmed my ability to focus and work hard over the previous 6 months. As my court date was slowly approaching, I started drinking less and started at a part-time at a restaurant near our house. February 16th, I woke up on the day of my court date. I took a deep breath and looked at myself in the mirror, staring into my blue eyes. I see in the reflection, imagining that young boy trying to escape his reality by driving to California. I imagine the mindset I had when I was a kid was that this feeling of struggle was temporary and that it would end. And I would go back to being part of the group with no problems, free to have fun without worry or anxiety. Standing in this moment, I would tell that boy that it doesn't go away. There isn't a moment where everything becomes all right. However, in the struggle, you experience profound moments of joy and success. I would tell him to stay away from the bad things. There are so many good things out there for you. Dressed in a white shirt and blue tie, Christian gave me a ride to the courthouse. I met my lawyer outside and shook his hand. I walked through the metal detector, hands raised in the air, and sat down on a bench in a populated courtroom. I saw my arresting officer across the room. I respected the man. He had open communication with me and was just doing his job. My lawyer walks in, greets me, and goes to shake the hand of the arresting officer. They both walk out into a meeting room to discuss details. After about 20 minutes, they both walked in, and my Lord pulled me to the side. He says, "You must have been praying to God, son. He has agreed to drop all the charges because you have completed the ADSAP class and were not drunk. The other two driving without a license charges were also dropped." A deep part of me in that moment, a part of me I didn't know existed, got warm like a blanket of freedom was wrapped around my body. I was free, and my record was clear. I walked into my home in Bluffton, gave my dad a hug, and told him the good news. He was relieved. The look in his eyes wasn't pride or happiness, just a look of how much you have been through, son. I'm so grateful you don't have to experience any more fear. 5 days later, dressed in the same blue suit, I walked into the DMV with my father and up to the agent's desk after she calls my name, and I say I'd like to get my license. She types in my information and says all your holds have cleared. At that moment, my dad handed me the keys to an old Honda he had and said, "This is yours." Feelings I have never felt before rushed through my body. I walk out of the DMV with a new South Carolina license in a car registered in my name. As I sit in the driver's seat, I feel a proud sense of strength run through my body and my veins through the center of my heart. I drop my dad off at home and go for a drive, smiling from ear to ear at the feeling of driving this vehicle legally. I had never experienced such joy in my life, such freedom, as if I could do anything, go anywhere, and become whoever I wanted to become. I drive to Hilton Head and give Christian a brief hug, then back in my car. I drive all over Hilton Head and then back to Bluffton. I think about a bridge I had crossed a few times north of Bluffton, a long stretch of concrete over a vast and wide river that looks like it extends to the edge of the universe. The destination, Beaufort, South Carolina. I drive the 20 miles and get close to the water. I get on YouTube and the first thing I see is a video for Avengers Endgame. God, it seems like 1,000 years ago. I fought my way out of that cave. Became Iron Man. At that moment, over the open water, it was as if everything in my life had led up to this exact feeling. I had become something greater than myself. I had fought my way out of my cave and became Iron Man. If you find this recording, don't feel bad about this. Part of the journey is in. I knew at that moment that RDJ's time had come to an end, and the world needed an Iron Man. I drove back to our home on Hilton Head that night and walked into me and Christian's house. I saw some friends and some new faces. I was there, but my spirit was elsewhere, elevated to a level beyond Nurnberg. I leave the house and begin to walk towards the beach. It's now dark out, my toes grazing the sand as I get to the edge of the water, almost exactly where I had tried to swim far enough out to end it all less than a year ago. I look up at the dark sky filled with stars. Then I get a notification on my phone. The body of Maori Beach had been found. A 19-year-old girl who had drowned after a drunk driver of a boat hit a bridge in South Carolina and sent her overboard. Our small town was wrapped in the tragedy. March 4th, 2019 is the date I'll never forget. One life was taken while another was returned. I then started walking onto the water. It felt as if it wasn't getting any deeper, and I just kept walking. I glanced up at the sky again and thanked God for letting me become my own hero. Then at that moment, I had a second thought of something that began to anger me deeply. Donald J. Trump. It was as if in my mind, this was his land, and only he was the hero. At a time when I wanted to think about great people who had overcome insurmountable odds, he was in my head, in my atmosphere. In an exchange meant to be between God and me, there was an egotistical, power-hungry maniac with no empathy in the middle. Heroes. It's an old-fashioned notion. A visionary. Genius, ensuring freedom around the globe. A symbol to a nation. A hero to the world. I was fully immersed, my mind wrapped in an iron shield, my heart bursting with happiness, motivation, and love for myself and the world around me. I had become a hero to myself, and like God gave me a purpose to be a hero to the world. The next day I told my girlfriend to separate herself from me. She needed to finish school, and I was now on a dangerous mission. I spent hours on end in the gym reading books and detoxing my mind and body from my previous lives of pleasantries. Then, on March 28, 2019, in Columbia, South Carolina, Another girl, Samantha Josephson, was killed less than 100 miles from our coastal town where the tragedy of Mallory Beach had consumed South Carolina. Now a second young life was taken. Mr. Josephson, sir, I have to tell you, I need to tell you. On March 28, 2019, at around 1 p.m., I created a company, Golden Palm Film Productions, to harness the power of the superhero videos that drove and sustained me since March 4th. At 8:30 p.m., I ran my first and only ad in Columbia, South Carolina. The image, our logo, was 2 golden palm trees. Every day for the last 5 years, I wake up, wash my face, look myself in the mirror, complexed about what happened in March 2019. I wonder if it was my fault. I wonder exactly what happened to your daughter. I wonder why I ran that ad. I wonder why me, why us. I began to walk away into the distance. I thought I had all this powerful energy inside me. I had developed upgrades in the past. My family is aerospace engineers. How do I not have the suit and tech built yet to combat such a tragedy so close to my home? A combination of sadness for the life lost, coupled with a spiritual happiness and strength that was attached to me inside of me. I got in my car and started to drive. For the first time in 3 years, I drove out of South Carolina state lines. I saw all these people die. I keep telling everyone they should move on. Some do, but not us. Every Marvel movie ever created playing in my car. We need heroes. To describe what I felt on that car ride would be a homeless boy becoming a millionaire or a man serving a life sentence proven innocent. It was a euphoric enjoyment driving through Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi, and I continued to head west. My mind started to develop the idea that I needed to inform Robert Downey Jr. that he had the right to know the events the universe had unfolded on the East Coast. And part of me needed his blessing to become the next Tony Stark. As I crossed through Texas and near the border of New Mexico, I saw the sign and passed over state lines. Then at that moment, it was as if something left my mind, like my atmosphere was suddenly clearer, like my existence had somehow become more freer, and the brainwashing grip that Donald Trump held over the lands of the East had disappeared. It was as if what I had felt standing on the beach looking up at the stars was proven true. No man stands between humanity and God. There is a bond for each man, woman, and child to discover on their own. It's their journey and their relationship with our Creator that matters. Nobody plays king and God at the same time. I'm not a Republican or Democrat. I'm not political or a philosopher. I only know the path I have led and the life I have lived. I remember watching Donald win and thinking this happened for a reason. I didn't realize that reason was I was to become his polar opposite. I derived my strength from the depths of hopelessness and despair, he from control and wealth, empathy versus ego, intelligence versus strength. I get past Arizona and into California at night, and I see an ocean of lights all lined up in rows, me peering down on the top of a mountain like I was at the edge of the world. It was one of the most beautiful things I'd ever seen. I get into LA at the dusk of sunrise, the city buildings in the background, the hills in the distance, and the tall, long palm trees fill the streets. I park my car and begin on foot. First, I walk towards the Hollywood sign and up the hills with the beautiful houses with views. Then I walk down towards the city and discover Sunset Boulevard. Its sidewalks with stars ingrained in the concrete and palm trees all along the pathways, big billboards and famous studio companies. Then I saw it, an enormous Avengers Endgame theater in the middle of Sunset Boulevard. I walk up to the entrance and buy a ticket for a showing that's playing. I walked into the packed theater. I stayed standing watching from the back. I watched Tony Stark die and can hear the crowd sobbing. One man who found a purpose sacrificed himself to save others. A story old as time. I exited the theater as soon as Tony's heart shut off and I walked outside. Overwhelmed with sadness, I knew it was a fictional character, but it was a part of me. The world needs Tony Stark. I took off my shirt with my NASA tattoo above my left tricep and walked into the streets. Cars came to a halt, people started to turn, and I yelled, "Fuck you, Donald Trump," To me, he was Thanos, my Thanos. Every Tony Stark has a Thanos. I lay in the street, half expecting a car to hit me. After a couple of minutes, I start to hear sirens and I get up to see cop cars and a fire truck. I put my arms in the air and approached them. I wasn't scared. This is exactly what was supposed to happen, and I needed to speak to them. I talked with a multitude of officers, and after a few minutes, they said, "You're free to go, or we can take you to jail." I acknowledged and said I wanted them to arrest me. Out of all the noise, all the people watching the cars, the lights as they were putting handcuffs on me, for some reason in the distance I heard a voice, the real Iron Man. I get in the car and they take me to jail. As I'm walking into the jail, the officer to my left, a beautiful woman, says, "What a man." I always respected police officers, but in that moment they became my allies. I was in handcuffs, but I actually felt like one of them, a good guy. I meet with a woman inside the jail and tell her my whole story. She listens intently and then finally says, "Okay, we're going to help you." I sat in a main room, still handcuffed, for about 2 hours. I wasn't filled with fear or regret. It was like I was becoming stronger. I had chosen to be there instead of always running. 2 officers approached me and said, "Come with me." I get into the police car, still shirtless. They take me to another building. I don't know where I am or what is happening, but I can still hear the distant voice in my head, the real Iron Man. I sat in a holding room for what seemed to be a basement of a large building, and after about an hour, a man walks in dressed in hospital clothes. He's holding a file in his hands. The first thing he says is, "Why'd you bring him here? You need to call the Secret Service." Is he on meth? I glance up at him and say, "No, absolutely not. I'm sober." He stares at me, his eyes full of surprise, as if I had startled him by being coherent and well-spoken, and he storms out. My mind started to wonder if I was in China or the Middle East, I would have been dead or tortured by now. I think about the generation of men and women who fought and died for the freedom I enjoyed. I wondered if Donald Trump had the ability, I certainly would be dead, and all the freedoms that Americans hold dear would be gone forever. After more than 2 hours, the doctor walks in with the nurse and says, "Okay, we're going to accept you into Los Angeles Mental Hospital." Mental hospital, I think. What does that mean? Where am I going? The nurse sticks a needle in my arm and gives me a pair of scrubs. They walk me into a room with a bed. I lie down and pass out. I had been driving for 3 days straight. I must have been asleep for at least 10 hours when I finally woke up. I'm not exactly sure where I am or what time it is. I walk down to an empty hall and approach a glass window. A nurse greets me and tells me to take this medication, 2 pills in a small cup. I sat in my room for a while when the doctors came in. "Dean, the Secret Service is here to see you." I walk into a room with doctors, a nurse, and 2 Secret Service agents. One was white and muscular, the other was Asian and tall, both holding stern looks on their faces. I immediately dive into my story, explaining everything. I tell them I'm a proud American. On March 4th, 2019, God gave me a different purpose and opened my eyes to something that can't be ignored. I ended by telling them after I crossed over the Texas border into New Mexico, I could feel the hate and mind control leave my body and spirit, and I was finally fully free. They glance at each other and give me a blank stare, then walk out the door. I never saw those 2 again. I greatly respected them, just not the leader they served who was in charge of the country I loved. I spent the next month aimlessly walking the halls of the hospital, reading the book Marley and me, a nurse, had given me, and taking the required medicine. Eventually, I started to ask questions like how long I was going to be there. The doctors would say a while longer. "We have to get your dosage right." I began to wonder if they wanted to keep me there forever. One day I was talking to another patient and he said that I could request a court date with a judge to determine my continued hospitalization. I marched into the office and demanded a court date. A week later, I was riding in a van with restraints on, marched up to the steps, and sat in front of a judge. My father was in the audience. He had traveled to LA when I called him to let him know what was happening. He visited me every day. I knew exactly what I was going to say to get out. I told the judge the doctor said my blood was at therapeutic levels and I was ready to go home. He granted my release, the restraints were taken off, and I walked out a free man. Although in my mind I had eternally become free on March 4th, 2019. No matter where I was or what was happening, my mind would forever be free. My dad drove me back from Hollywood all the way across the country to the other coast back to Bluffton, South Carolina. On June 4th, 2019, I had been home for about 2 weeks. I turned on my computer and saw the headline, Robert Downey Jr. announcing a footprint coalition to clean up the earth. I got a rush of joy. It felt like he had received my message. I started to imagine that he had maybe heard about the shirtless man with the NASA tattoo and could have found out about the boy who dreamt of becoming Iron Man, son and grandson of aerospace engineers who had a story similar to his of overcoming addiction and solving his legal quarrels. I did not know if someone had received my message, but that would come soon. On June 15th, 2019, I made a post that read, "First it will be the economy. It will crash hard. And then, as always, he will blame immigrants, poor people, and democracy. This is my warning. Take your money out of the stock market. Bring your children home and pray. Trump, please step down, and I know God will forgive you. May God be with us all." 48 minutes later, on June 15th, 2019, Trump wrote a post, "If anyone but me takes over, I know my enemies very well. There will be a market crash, the likes of which has not been seen before. Keep America great again." I could picture in my head the Secret Service agents briefing him on the events in LA and him looking at my social media and seeing information about my grandpa's time at NASA, my father's work with Lockheed, and perhaps becoming overwhelmed with jealousy at my connection to America's greatest superhero, Tony Stark. I knew this envy could be dangerous, and COVID would soon prove my theory right. I'm not saying I don't get envy or jealousy for others. I'm not saying I don't have insecurities like all humans. I'm not even saying Donald Trump should have become president. He shows us the darkness of selfishness. I just knew the lacking of basic understanding of empathy was a dangerous quality for any American world leader. I knew on March 4, 2019 that if I had become Tony Stark, I had to do everything in my power to prevent a second reign of power from humanity's version of Thanos. I wasn't tricked, I was shown. In early September, I created a business profile for Nurnberg Incorporated, a prerequisite for Nurnberg Industries. On September 19th, my birthday, I saw Trump had changed his campaign information to Trump Incorporated. Then one night I saw Robert Downey Jr. delete his Footprint Coalition page for some reason, so I started a new one and invited all my East Coast connections to like it. The next morning, October 3rd, 2019, a tragedy happened that will affect me for the rest of my days on Earth. I woke up and got a Facebook message from one of Christian's old girlfriends saying, "What happened to Christian?" Initially, I was confused, not thinking anything serious, so I texted a mutual friend, and he responded, "Christian died this morning." A sharp pain runs through my heart. Memories of smiles, handshakes, cheering on football games we bet on, or me crying at the beach in hopeless times. I never saw Christian cry. I cry tears of joy now every day. I start to think about how I'll never be the best man at his wedding. I think about how I'll never watch him be a good dad to his kids, the type of dad he didn't have. I knew he was struggling because unfortunately a month after I moved out, he got a DUI. I knew it was going to be almost impossible for him to complete the ADSAP class. He wasn't built like me. He was a strong man, but he couldn't handle the isolation and focus it took to figure that out. What hurt the most is how alone he must have felt the night he drank and did drugs until he accidentally overdosed. I had offered to move out west with him, but he loved the low country too much. On October 3rd, 2019, Christian Copeland was pronounced dead. 2 weeks later, his funeral was held, but I couldn't bring myself to go. It hurt too bad. I didn't want to make other people uncomfortable. The news spread through our town, and I imagined heaven got another angel from the low country of South Carolina. I was still battling with a higher power. A month later, Trump announced, "I am the chosen one," insulting the God who had saved my life. Then, on December 11th, 2019, it happened. I turned on the TV and saw the news. Donald Trump compares himself to comic book villain Thanos. He had just openly admitted to all of humanity for the rest of human history that he fancied being a genocidal maniac hell-bent on power. I wish it hadn't made me happy, like I hadn't just proven what I felt that night on the beach. I wish it wasn't a reality that this was the America we live in, but it did, and it was. I had watched every video ever created of the hero defeating the powerful villain, and I just realized how embedded in human history this message was. Just how powerful one small man or woman can be if they have good inside them and they believe beyond a shadow of a doubt. I knew at that moment in December Trump had lost. There was only one thing Americans loved more than money. It was superheroes. I spent the next couple of months traveling the states, meeting people, helping any homeless I would encounter, and talking to people who had lost hope. I was trying to tell America that someone still cared. Then in 2020, COVID started to happen. I would hear about it on the news, and I knew it was going to be bad. I knew it would require unpopular decisions that involved empathy, something our leader did not have. As it progressively got worse, it seemed as though this is what God warned me about and exactly why I needed Trump to step down. People started to die and the economy began its descent. As I traveled from city to city, the fear began to spread. The chaos and depression had worsened, unemployment and savings accounts drained across the United States and the world. Sometime in the summer of 2020, I posted a picture in front of the White House. My Facebook was deleted the following day by whoever I do not know. I decided to focus on making some money and re-engineering my brain to slow down my thinking for the time being. I lived in Denver, Colorado and worked as a bathroom remodeling sales associate. I memorized a 25-page script while living out of my car. I made my first sale and it felt similar to my Marriott success. Multiple deals began to follow. November 3rd, 2020 was slowly approaching, and my anxiety about the outcome of the election was building. Around 2 weeks before the election, I began walking around Denver all day contemplating. On the third day, I walked up to a pond and threw my phone in the water. I thought if people didn't know where I was, then the police would file a missing persons report and would draw attention to my final act of courage before the election. I found my way back to the apartment and slept for a couple of hours. I woke up while it was still dark and walked to the bus station in Denver. LA again? No. New York? No. Phoenix? No. Then I saw Wyoming and an image popped into my head of me walking the road up to the big ranch belonging to Kanye West. Perhaps there was a way I could explain to him my experiences and his influence could change the needed votes to Democratic. The only ticket was the next day. I purchased it, and while there I got to talking to two stranded travelers. I decided I would help them and leave my apartment while I was gone. The day was very enjoyable. I wasn't sure of the future, and I knew hard times lay ahead for me, so I relaxed as best as I could. I boarded the bus in the afternoon to Wyoming. I wasn't sure exactly where I was going. The only information I had was the name Bighorn Ranch. I was sure my parents were wondering where I was. Perhaps they had filed a missing persons report and news would begin to spread. I got off the bus close to 4 a.m. in the middle of Wyoming at a gas station and started walking. I walked through fields, over fences, and onto the side of the highway. As it got hotter, I started to leave behind my jacket, threw my wallet in the woods, and kept walking. Eventually, I was down to a yellow NASA shirt with the left sleeve cut off, showing my tattoo and a pair of jeans. I walked for hours and passed multiple towns. Every so often, I would stop at a gas station to ask for a map, but no one had one. Eventually, I started to fall over. My feet were cramping up, and I had blisters. In the early afternoon, as I was walking on the side of the highway, a police officer came up behind me, and I just started running straight ahead. I wasn't trying to escape, but I knew I would never make it to Bighorn, so this is my last act of theatrics. I pulled out the only thing I was carrying with me, a small Bible, and held it in the air. Traffic started to back up, and after about 5 minutes of me running as fast as I could up the highway, the officer nudged me with his car and I fell to the ground. He asked me what I was doing and what my name was, but I was too tired to speak. He put me in the back of his car. Multiple officers came, a fire truck and an ambulance, and a sheriff opened my door and asked me if I was okay. I just looked into his eyes and didn't speak. He asked me some questions I don't remember, then asked me who the President of the United States was, and I yelled with my last breath, "Fuck Donald Trump." He closed the door and walked over to the ambulance, then came back and opened the door and asked me if I wanted to go to the hospital. I nodded my head. I lay in the ambulance. They gave me a couple shots in the arm and I closed my eyes. I woke up in the hospital room surrounded by officers and nurses. They asked me what my name was and I showed them my tattoo of my grandpa's name. Jean Nurnberg. One of the nurses said, "I know that name." I wondered if they had seen the episodes in the early 2000s with my grandpa at the space station. The nurse said, "If you don't tell us your name, we're going to have to take blood samples and give you more injections." I showed her my forearm. I wanted them to piece together my story, and I knew I'd be sitting down with the Secret Service soon so I could take some temporary pain to add to the theatrics. It wasn't the government or the military that was the beating heart of America. It was cinema, the virtual coliseum. If I was to become more powerful than the digital showman of America, I had to give the people something they'd never seen before. The next day, the chief of police came in and said, "How are you doing, Dean?" He had figured out who I was, but I'm not sure how. He said he didn't have any warrants and you weren't technically doing anything illegal. Why were you running? I said I needed to speak to the leader of the free world. One of the other officers asked me if I was talking about Kanye West. I said, "Can you take me to him?" They transferred me to the mental hospital ward the next day. After a couple of hours in a cell, a guard came in. Usually they immediately shut the doors, but he left it swing open ever so slightly, and right before it closed, I ran out dressed in only hospital pants. I ran through the hallways, downstairs. I could hear people chasing behind me. I eventually came across a side door and I exited the building with no shoes on. I ran across the road and up the street. I didn't necessarily want to escape, but if I could add some more theatrics before election day, I was going to. My feet started to bleed and I came across a four-way stop in the middle of a town. I lay in the road half expecting a giant truck to run me over. Some people came up to me and asked me if I was okay. Then an officer came up, picked me up and put me in the car and took me back to the hospital. The nurses came up to me and immediately injected me with 3 or 4 different shots. I slept for a day and woke up in a room similar to the LA hospital. I walked into the hall. I liked this layout better. There was a gym and multiple TVs. The next day I sat down with a Secret Service agent. He didn't seem too concerned and the conversation was brief. I had assumed he had a lot going on. As he was walking away, he said, "To get better, Dean." The night before the election, I sat in bed, staring up at the wall. All the TVs were off. I imagined my life up to this point, as if it were split into 2 separate parts. A time of disconnect from the universe and humanity to a profound connection to all things, strength, happiness, confidence, and purpose. I woke up the next day and a nurse came into my room and told me Biden won. I smiled and thanked God. I knew Americans wouldn't let me down. I spent the next week in a good mood, hanging out with other patients and working out. The food was terrible, but overall, it was not a bad experience. They let me go after a week, and my dad picked me up and dropped me off back in Denver. The next day, I woke up, turned my apartment keys into the office, and drove my silver Nissan Altima to LA. I walked the streets day and night. I would wake up at 3 a.m., pick up trash for an hour, ride the bus to the beach, and watch the sunrise. I think the people, especially the homeless, could see in my eyes that I had a good soul and would talk to me with respect. They could see I didn't care about money or status. I cared about empathy, personal improvement, and being a hero. There were a couple of nights I was homeless myself. Occasionally I had to ask Brad for money for pizza. I knew it wounded him deeply to have his older brother bothering him for $7, but he is infinitely loyal to his family and friends and obliged when I called him. Those slices of pizza symbolize a debt I'll never be able to repay to Brad and my family for everything I put them through and they have done for me. I explored every part of the City of Angels. I drove my car past the diner where they filmed Fast and Furious, and I could feel Paul Walker's energy. It was tangible, and I could picture him sitting in the next seat to me, smiling. A couple days later, I gave my car away to a homeless couple and flew back to Bluffton, South Carolina. I felt the universe had given me a jolt of happiness, and I had done good with it. Perhaps they could too. After being home for a couple of days, I started to realize Donald Trump was not accepting the election. He was threatening people and spreading lies. Then I heard of a rally in Washington, D.C. being held on January 6th, and instantly I knew what that meant. That night I woke up from my sleep, and for a second I felt like I saw a dark figure standing in front of my bed. Not a man or a woman. It startled me initially. I ran downstairs and alerted my father, who said it was just a dream. I made a Facebook post a couple of minutes later with some strong choice words for the outgoing president. The following night, a police car and a black SUV came to our house, and a Secret Service agent walked in. He had dark eyebrows and thinning gray hair, my height, and a tough but fair look on his face. Of all 4 agents, he was instantly my favorite. I shook his hand. I was expecting someone to show up. First thing he said was, "I don't want to ruin your life, Dean." I think perhaps he was caught off guard by my blank expression. Perhaps he could sense I was a free man. No cell or government charge could change that. When we started talking for a couple of hours, I told him my life story. I told him about March 4th, 2019, how I had gotten my license back, my connection with Iron Man was created, my family's work. Then I said people need dramatic experiences to shake them out of apathy. He looked at me and said, "Of my 25 years on this job, you're the most intelligent I've ever talked to." At that moment, my brain flipped a tiny switch. I had endless amounts of thoughts, but it was like he allowed me to categorize them and make questions and answers make sense. He gave me the one thing I crave most in the world, to be as intelligent as my father. I am forever indebted to Alex for giving me that. He gave me his card, told me I had a bright future, and left. 2 days later, something didn't feel right. I knew January 6th was approaching. I knew this was the final day in human history that I could make it known to future generations who look back that I was willing to give my life against tyranny. I texted Alex and I said, "I want you to arrest me." He replied, "You're a bright young man with people who care about you. If I can get the U.S. attorney on board, are you willing to commit to a hospital?" This time, though, I didn't want to go to a hospital. I wanted to go to jail. I wanted history to know Donald Trump put a 25-year-old kid in jail for standing up to his destructive ego. I drove to the Bluffton police station and asked to turn myself in. They looked up for my information, and I had no warrants, so they drove me home. The next day, Alex texted me and said, "I spoke to our attorney, and we feel arresting you right now is not the best solution, but we want you to go with Officer George, the other officer who came to my house, and check into a mental hospital." I agreed. The Bluffton police took me to another mental hospital in Charleston, South Carolina, where Alex's office was. He came to check on me after I watched January 6th unfold on TV in the hospital. I watched in horror as a few brave police officers, people who 2 years ago I avidly avoided at all costs, the people I initially feared had become my allies and saved my life in LA and Wyoming. Men and women who I had grown to respect and admire fought off hundreds of violent American nationalists. Was I similar to them? Maybe one could make that argument, but I would never use violence. My weapon is intelligence and pain endurance. They seek to hurt others, and in doing so they deeply wounded democracy that day. Democracy was the bedrock for which society successfully operated, but they could not respect the peaceful transition of power. It wasn't their fault. Behind all the anger was the mind control and the superior ideology of one evil man, Donald Trump. On January 19th, Alex came to visit me for the last time. I shook his hand and said, "Our story has a beginning, middle, and end." I walked out of the mental hospital for the last time on January 20th, 2021. I watched Joe Biden getting sworn in as president on my cell phone, eating a Moe's burrito I had been craving for 2 weeks while in the hospital as my father drove me home. A deep love for America in my heart and an unbreakable optimism for the future, or so I thought. That's the end. Thank you.